I am Tessa, 28 years old, and I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family until my phone rang at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night. My golden child brother Xavier was calling me from the Multnomah County Jail, arrested on felony charges, begging me to pay his $50,000 bail. When I hesitated, my parents delivered an ultimatum that shattered everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. Pay Xavier's bail and legal fees or consider myself dead to them. I chose my own financial future for once and hung up the phone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the forgotten daughter in what appeared to be a picture-perfect middle-class family in Portland, Oregon, I never imagined that one day I would be forced to choose between my financial security and my family's demands. Our childhood home was a beautiful craftsman-style house in the Hawthorne district, complete with a manicured front garden that my mother Maureen tended obsessively, and a two-car garage housing my father Vincent's pristine BMW and my mother's practical Subaru. From the outside, we looked like the ideal Pacific Northwest family, educated, environmentally conscious, and comfortably successful. But appearances, as I learned painfully over the years, can be devastatingly deceiving. My father, Vincent, worked as a senior architect at a prestigious firm downtown, designing sustainable buildings that won awards and brought him recognition throughout the city. My mother, Maureen, was a part-time yoga instructor who also ran a small but successful Etsy shop selling handmade jewelry. They were the kind of parents who attended PTA meetings religiously, hosted neighborhood barbecues, and always seemed to have their lives perfectly organized. The first memory I have of truly understanding my place in our family hierarchy came when I was 7 years old, just 2 years after my brother Xavier was born. I had spent weeks preparing for my elementary school science fair, staying up late nights with my father helping me build a volcano that would erupt with baking soda and vinegar. I was so proud of that project, convinced it would win first place and make my parents beam with pride. The night before the science fair, 5-year-old Xavier had one of his frequent meltdowns, the kind that would send my mother into a panic and require both parents to drop everything to manage his emotions. In the chaos of comforting him, my carefully constructed volcano was knocked over and completely destroyed. When I burst into tears, devastated that weeks of work had been ruined, my father's response was sharp and dismissive. "Tessa, you're the big sister. You need to be more understanding. Xavier didn't mean it, and you can always make another one." There was no time to rebuild it. I went to school the next day, empty-handed, watching my classmates display their projects while I sat with nothing to show for my efforts. My parents never mentioned it again, never acknowledged the disappointment or offered to help me try again. But they spent the entire weekend taking Xavier to a special children's museum exhibit because he had been so upset about the volcano incident. That pattern would define our childhood and beyond. When I turned 10, I discovered a talent for digital art and graphic design, spending hours on our family computer creating intricate designs and learning Photoshop tutorials from YouTube. I begged my parents for design software and maybe some classes at the community center. "Those programs are expensive, Tessa," my mother explained with barely a glance at my work. "And you're already spending too much time on that computer. Maybe you should focus on your schoolwork instead." That same summer, 8-year-old Xavier expressed an interest in music after hearing a guitar solo on the radio. Within a week, my parents had purchased a $800 acoustic guitar, signed him up for private lessons with one of Portland's most sought-after instructors, and converted our spare bedroom into a practice space, complete with soundproofing and professional recording equipment. When I pointed out that my design work could be just as valuable as his music, my father responded, "Music is a real skill. What you do on the computer is just playing around." The financial disparities became impossible to ignore as we entered our teenage years. When I turned 16, I had saved nearly $2,000 from babysitting neighborhood kids and working weekends at a local coffee shop. My parents contributed exactly $500 toward a 1998 Honda Civic with 150,000 miles on the odometer and a persistent check engine light. This will teach you responsibility and the value of hard work, Vincent declared, as he handed me the keys to what would become my constant source of stress and unexpected repair bills. 18 months later, when Xavier turned 16, my parents surprised him with a brand new Ford Explorer, complete with premium sound system, leather seats, and every safety feature available. The monthly insurance premium alone was more than I made in my part-time job. When I asked about the obvious difference in treatment, my mother simply shrugged. Xavier needs reliable transportation for all his gigs and music activities. Your car has been perfectly fine for getting you around town. The fact that I had just as many activities, debate team, volunteer work at the animal shelter, and my part-time job, seemed completely irrelevant to them. But perhaps the most painful disparity came when it was time for college applications. Despite maintaining a 3.8 GPA, scoring in the 90th percentile on my SATs, and having a portfolio of design work that impressed several college admissions counselors, my parents informed me during my senior year that they could only contribute minimally to my education. We've been looking at our finances, and with the economy being uncertain, we just can't commit to much, Vincent explained, during what I thought would be a planning session for my future. You'll need to apply for financial aid and maybe consider community college for your first 2 years to keep costs down. I applied for every scholarship I could find, wrote essays until my fingers cramped, and still graduated with $38,000 in student loans to attend Portland State University. I worked 20 hours a week throughout college just to afford textbooks and basic living expenses, often choosing between buying groceries and filling my car with gas. Xavier, meanwhile, was sent to Berkeley's prestigious music program with a price tag of $55,000 per year, all expenses paid by our parents. Xavier has such incredible talent, my mother gushed to anyone who would listen. We couldn't possibly let financial concerns stand in the way of his artistic development. He's going to be the next big thing in indie music. The unspoken implication that my dreams and talents were somehow less valuable, less worthy of investment, stung worse than any direct insult could have. Despite all this, my relationship with Xavier wasn't openly hostile. We simply existed in completely different universes. He wasn't deliberately cruel to me. He was just utterly absorbed in his own world of music, opportunity, and endless parental support. Our conversations were surface level at best, limited to holiday gatherings and family dinners where he would perform his latest songs, where I sat quietly in the background. I sometimes wondered if he even noticed the stark differences in how we were treated, or if the inequality had been so normalized throughout our lives that it seemed natural to him. The golden child treatment wasn't something he had asked for, but he certainly never questioned it or acknowledged how it affected me. After graduating from college at 22, I immediately moved into a tiny studio apartment in Southeast Portland and secured an entry-level position as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized nonprofit organization. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover my rent, student loan payments, and basic necessities, but it offered health insurance and the possibility of growth. I learned to budget meticulously, shopping at thrift stores, cooking meals at home, and finding free entertainment around the city. Meanwhile, Xavier graduated with his music degree and immediately announced his intention to pursue his dream of becoming a professional musician. My parents converted their finished basement into a fully equipped recording studio, allowing him to live at home rent-free while he built his brand, as Vincent proudly called it. They even provided $15,000 in seed money to help him produce his first album and book gigs around the Pacific Northwest. Our family interactions became increasingly limited and uncomfortable for me. I called my parents once a month out of obligation, conversations that inevitably centered around Xavier's latest musical achievements, upcoming shows, or creative projects. I returned home for major holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, each visit reinforcing my status as the practical, boring daughter who had chosen a safe career path over artistic pursuits. Gift exchanges were always telling. My parents gave me practical items, kitchen appliances, plain sweaters from Target, gift cards to chain restaurants. Xavier received expensive musical equipment, vintage guitars, professional recording sessions, and weekend trips to music festivals in other cities. By age 28, I had settled into what I thought was my permanent reality. A demanding but fulfilling job that I had worked my way up in, a small but comfortable apartment that I had furnished entirely on my own, and a social circle of colleagues and neighbors who appreciated me for who I was, rather than constantly comparing me to someone else. I had managed to pay down my student loans to $15,000, a small victory that went completely unacknowledged by my family. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious had developed, partly because I had learned to be so self-reliant that letting someone else into my carefully constructed life felt risky. I had a few close friendships, enjoyed hiking in the Columbia River Gorge on weekends, and had even started taking evening photography classes at the community college. Little did I know that my phone would ring on that February night, and everything I thought I understood about my family's priorities would be tested in the most shocking way possible. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was deep in sleep when my phone buzzed insistently on my nightstand. Groggily, I reached for it, assuming it must be some kind of emergency. No one calls at that hour unless something terrible has happened. Tessa? The voice was unmistakably Xavier's, but it sounded different. Smaller, scared, desperate in a way I had never heard from my usually confident brother. Xavier? What's wrong? Are you okay? I sat up in bed, instantly alert. I'm in jail, Tess. I need help. The words hit me like ice water. What? What happened? Are you hurt? I got arrested tonight. They're charging me with, his voice broke, possession with intent to distribute and assault. The bail is $50,000, and I don't have it. Mom and Dad don't have it either. I need you to help me. My mind reeled. Xavier, my golden child brother who had never faced a real consequence in his life, was calling me from jail, asking for more money than I had ever seen at once. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being the responsible one, the one who handled everything on my own, he was turning to me in his moment of crisis. Xavier, slow down. Tell me exactly what happened. But that conversation would have to wait, because what came next would force me to confront everything I had spent years trying to accept about my place in our family and make a choice that would change all of our lives forever. Tessa, please, you have to listen to me. Xavier's voice cracked through the phone, desperation bleeding through every word. I was at this party in Southeast, just a small gathering with some musicians and industry people. Someone said there were A&R scouts there, people who could really help my career. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, trying to process what my brother was telling me at nearly 3 a.m. Go on. There was this guy there, Marcus, who claimed he worked for a major label. He had all these connections, knew all the right people. He said he could get my demo to the right executives, but I needed to prove I was serious about the business side of music. Xavier's words came out in a rush, like he was afraid if he stopped talking, I might hang up. What does that have to do with you being arrested? He said successful musicians need to understand all aspects of the industry, including the party scene. He had these pills, said they were just to help with energy for late-night studio sessions. He convinced me to buy some, said it showed I was ready for the real music industry lifestyle. My stomach dropped. Xavier, who had been handed everything his entire life, had been naive enough to fall for what was obviously a setup or a scam. Please tell me you didn't actually buy drugs from some random guy at a party. It gets worse, Tess. When the police showed up, and I think now that Marcus might have tipped them off, I panicked. I tried to run, and I pushed this cop who grabbed my arm. That's the assault charge. I sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of my brother's stupidity. The golden child who had never faced real consequences, who had been protected from every harsh reality by our parents, had just thrown his life away because he believed some stranger at a party could jumpstart his stagnant music career. How much were you trying to buy? I asked, dreading the answer. Enough that they're saying I was planning to sell it, intent to distribute.
My lawyer says I could be looking at 5 to 10 years if convicted. The number hit me like a physical blow. 5 to 10 years. My mind immediately went to the practical concerns that Xavier had probably never even considered. What about his future? His ability to find work? The cost of legal defense? Have you called Mom and Dad? They're on their way to the jail now. But Tessa, the bail is $50,000. Even if they could get a bail bondsman, they'd need 10% down. And with the legal fees, his voice broke again. They don't have it. The recording studio they built for me, my equipment, the money they've spent on my music career over the years, they've tapped out their savings. There it was. The brutal irony that my parents had spent so much money supporting Xavier's dreams that they couldn't afford to save him from the nightmare he created. What exactly are you asking me for, Xavier? I need you to pay the bail and probably help with legal fees. I know it's a lot, but you're my brother. Family helps family, right? Family helps family. The phrase that had been used to justify every inequity in our childhood, every sacrifice I had been expected to make, every time I had been told to be understanding when Xavier received something I was denied. How much are we talking about total? The bail bondsman needs $5,000 down, and the lawyer Mom and Dad found wants a $15,000 retainer, so $20,000 to start. $20,000. Nearly 2/3 of my entire yearly salary after taxes. Money that I had in savings, checking, and emergency funds combined. Money that I would have to borrow against my 401k or take out personal loans to access, probably destroying my credit and financial stability for years. Xavier, I don't have that kind of money. But you have a good job and good credit. You could get a loan, or a loan that I would be responsible for paying back while you what? Go back to living in Mom and Dad's basement playing music? This is different, Tess. This is an emergency. I could have been killed in here. Do you know what happens to guys like me in prison? The emotional manipulation was immediate and predictable. Xavier, who had spent 26 years having every problem solved by someone else, was now using fear tactics to pressure me into sacrificing my financial security for his mistakes. Have you considered that maybe this is exactly the kind of consequence you needed to face? The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was surprised to find I meant them.
What's that supposed to mean? It means that for 26 years, every mistake you've made, every problem you've created, every time you've needed help, Mom and Dad have swooped in to fix it. You've never had to face the real-world consequences of your choices. Maybe this time you should. I can't believe you're saying that. I'm your brother. I'm in jail. You're in jail because you made incredibly stupid choices. You bought drugs from a stranger at a party and then assaulted a police officer when you got caught. Those were your decisions, Xavier. Not mine. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Xavier spoke again, his voice had changed from desperate to calculating. Fine. If you won't help me, I'll call Aunt Deborah and Uncle Keith. Or maybe some of my musician friends. Someone will understand that family loyalty means something. Go ahead, I said, surprised by my own calm. Call whoever you want. But don't threaten me with other people's generosity to manipulate me into making a decision that would destroy my financial future. Mom and Dad are going to be so disappointed in you. And there it was, the threat that had controlled me my entire childhood. The fear of disappointing parents who had never seemed particularly invested in my happiness or success anyway. They'll get over it, I replied, just like they got over all the times they disappointed me. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, Xavier. It means nothing. Look, I need to think about this. Let me talk to Mom and Dad when they get there. There's nothing to think about, Tessa. Either you help your family when we need you most, or you don't. It's that simple. But it wasn't simple at all. It was the culmination of 28 years of being the responsible one, the backup plan, the child who was expected to succeed without support and sacrifice without complaint. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Xavier's arrest had done something I never expected. It had created a situation where my parents couldn't solve his problems with their money or influence.
For the first time in our lives, Xavier needed something from me that I wasn't obligated to give. My phone buzzed almost immediately with a text from my mother. On our way to jail. We'll call you soon. Xavier needs our help. Our help. Not Xavier needs help. Xavier needs our help. Already, my mother was framing this as a family obligation rather than Xavier's personal crisis. I lay back down in bed, staring at the ceiling as the pre-dawn darkness slowly gave way to gray light filtering through my apartment windows. In a few hours, my phone would ring again, and my parents would make their own demands about what I owed to family loyalty. But for the first time in my adult life, I found myself genuinely considering saying no. The irony wasn't lost on me that Xavier's lowest moment might finally be the catalyst for me to find my voice and establish boundaries I should have set years ago. My brother's addiction to consequence-free living had finally led him somewhere my parents' money and influence couldn't reach. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something important. Not just for Xavier, but for all of us.
My phone rang again at 6:30 a.m., just as I was getting out of the shower and preparing for what I knew would be an impossible day at work. My mother's name flashed on the screen, and I could already hear the tension in the ringtone itself. "Tessa, thank God you're awake." Maureen's voice was strained, exhausted, and carried an edge of panic I had rarely heard from her. "We just got back from the jail. This is so much worse than we thought." "What do you mean, worse?" I asked, toweling off my hair while balancing the phone against my shoulder. "The charges are serious, honey. Really serious. The lawyer says that because of the amount of drugs involved and the assault on a police officer, the prosecutor is going to push for maximum penalties. Xavier could be looking at 8 to 12 years if this goes to trial and he loses." 8 to 12 years? The number hit me like a cold wave. Despite my anger at Xavier's stupidity and my resentment over years of favoritism, the thought of my brother spending over a decade in prison was genuinely terrifying. What did the lawyers say about plea options? "There might be possibilities, but only if we can get him out on bail and show the court that he has family support and a stable home environment. If he stays in jail until trial, it makes him look like a flight risk and a danger to society." I could hear my father's voice in the background, muffled but clearly agitated. My mother continued, "Vincent wants to talk to you too. Can you meet us for breakfast? We need to discuss this as a family." The phrase, "as a family," struck me as particularly ironic, considering how rarely my input had been sought on family decisions throughout my life. But the gravity of the situation seemed to demand at least hearing them out. "I can meet you before work, but I can only stay for about 45 minutes. "Perfect. How about that little diner on Hawthorne, near your old high school? We can be there in 20 minutes. As I drove to meet my parents, my mind raced through the implications of what Xavier was facing. Despite our complicated relationship, despite years of resentment over the inequality in our treatment, he was still my brother. The thought of him navigating the prison system for nearly a decade was genuinely heartbreaking. But the rational part of my brain kept returning to the financial reality. $20,000 was more money than I could realistically access without destroying my own financial stability. Even if I could get loans to cover it, the monthly payments would consume most of my discretionary income for years. I found my parents already seated in a corner booth at the diner, looking like they had aged 5 years overnight. My father's usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his hair uncombed. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and her hands shook slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. "Tessa, sweetheart, thank you for coming." Vincent stood to hug me, something he rarely did. The desperation in his embrace was palpable. "How are you both holding up?" "We're not," Maureen said simply. "This is our worst nightmare. Our baby boy could spend the best years of his life in prison because of one stupid mistake." One stupid mistake. Already, my parents were minimizing Xavier's actions, buying drugs and assaulting a police officer, as a single error in judgment, rather than a series of terrible decisions that revealed deeper problems with his character and judgment. "Tell me about the lawyer you found." Vincent leaned forward intently.
Janet Morrison. She's one of the best criminal defense attorneys in Portland. She's handled cases like this before and has a good relationship with the prosecutors. But she's expensive. How expensive? $15,000 for the retainer and probably another $10,000 to $15,000 before it's all over, Maureen answered. Plus court costs, potential fines, and if he needs treatment programs. I did quick mental math. They were talking about potentially $30,000 to $40,000 in total costs. Even if I could somehow access $20,000 for the immediate needs, there would be ongoing expenses that could drain my finances for years. What about your savings, your retirement accounts? My parents exchanged a glance that told me everything I needed to know before Vincent answered. We've already spent most of our available cash on Xavier's music career over the years. The recording studio in the basement cost $18,000. His instruments, equipment, the album production, marketing, travel to music festivals. He trailed off, running his hands through his disheveled hair. How much do you actually have available? About $3,000 in checking and maybe another $2,000 we could pull from savings without devastating our retirement, Maureen admitted. We already took out a second mortgage 2 years ago to pay for Xavier's demo recordings and music video production. The full scope of their financial overextension was staggering. My parents, who had always seemed so financially secure, had apparently spent themselves into near insolvency supporting Xavier's music dreams. They had gambled their retirement security on his potential success, and now faced the reality that those investments had not only failed to pay off, but they had left them unable to help him in his moment of greatest need.
So you need me to cover $17,000 immediately, plus potentially much more as the case progresses. Tessa, I know it's a lot, Vincent began, his voice taking on a pleading tone I had never heard from him. But you have a stable job, good credit, no dependents. You could get loans, maybe borrow against your 401k. Dad, those loans would take me years to pay off. Borrowing for my retirement would mean penalties and taxes, plus losing years of compound growth. You're asking me to sacrifice my financial future for Xavier's mistakes. He's your brother, Maureen said, tears beginning to flow again. Family takes care of family. You know we would do the same for you if the situation were reversed. Would they? The question hung unspoken in the air, but we all knew the answer. Throughout my entire life, when I had needed help with college tuition, with car repairs, with any kind of financial support, my parents had consistently explained why they couldn't assist me. Yet now they were asking me to take on crushing debt for Xavier without hesitation. What about selling the house, downsizing? The market is terrible right now, and with the second mortgage, we wouldn't clear enough to make a significant difference, Vincent explained. Plus, where would Xavier live when he gets out? He needs a stable home environment to show the court he's serious about rehabilitation. There it was. The assumption that Xavier would be moving back in with them after this crisis passed, continuing the pattern of dependence that had enabled his poor decision-making in the first place. Have you considered that maybe Xavier needs to face the full consequences of his actions? That constantly rescuing him from problems might have contributed to the attitude that got him arrested in the first place? My parents stared at me in shock, as if I had suggested abandoning a drowning child. Tessa, how can you say that? Maureen's voice rose. He made a mistake, yes, but people make mistakes. That doesn't mean we stop loving them or helping them. I'm not talking about love. I'm talking about accountability. Xavier has never had to face real consequences for anything. Every time he's made a bad decision, you've intervened to minimize the impact. Maybe that's part of the problem. So you're saying we should just let him rot in prison? Vincent's tone was becoming angry. I'm saying maybe Xavier should be the one figuring out how to get himself out of the situation, not expecting his family to mortgage their futures to save him from the consequences of his choices. The silence that followed was heavy with disappointment and disbelief. My parents clearly couldn't comprehend that I might not immediately sacrifice everything to help Xavier, just as I was finally beginning to realize that their love and support had always been conditional on my willingness to be the responsible one who asked for nothing and gave everything.
"We need an answer, Tessa," Vincent said finally. "The bail hearing is tomorrow afternoon. If we can't post bail, Xavier stays in jail until trial, which could be months away. Every day he spends in there increases his danger and hurts his chances with the judge." I looked at my watch. I was already going to be late for work, and this conversation was nowhere near resolution. I need time to think about this. This is potentially the biggest financial decision of my life. "There's no time," Maureen pleaded. "We need to know today so we can coordinate with the bail bondsman." And there it was, the pressure, the urgency, the demand for an immediate decision that would commit me to years of financial hardship. The same pattern that had characterized every family crisis throughout my life. Xavier creates a problem, and everyone else is expected to drop everything to solve it immediately. For the first time, I found myself genuinely considering whether that pattern needed to end.
I arrived at work 45 minutes late, my mind still reeling from the breakfast conversation with my parents. My supervisor, Amanda, noticed immediately that something was wrong. "Tessa, you look like you haven't slept. Is everything okay?" I debated how much to share, then decided honesty was the best approach. Family emergency. My brother was arrested last night, and my parents are asking me to help pay his bail and legal fees. Amanda's expression shifted to one of concern. "That's a lot to deal with. How much are we talking about?" $20,000 to start, possibly $40,000 total." Her eyes widened. "Jesus, that's more than half your annual salary. Do you have that kind of money?" "Not even close. I'd have to take out loans, probably borrow against my retirement account. It would financially cripple me for years." What did he do? "Drug possession with intent to distribute, plus assault on a police officer." Amanda was quiet for a moment, processing. "Tessa, can I give you some unsolicited advice from someone who's been in a similar situation?" I nodded gratefully. "My brother went through addiction issues about 5 years ago. Different circumstances, but similar family pressure to bail him out financially and emotionally every time he screwed up. The best thing I ever did for him was stop enabling his destructive behavior. It was the hardest decision I ever made, but it forced him to get serious about recovery and taking responsibility for his life." "What happened?" "He spent 3 months in jail, which scared him straight more effectively than years of family interventions and paid rehabilitation programs had. He's been clean for 4 years now and has a steady job. More importantly, he learned that his actions have consequences, and his family isn't an endless ATM for fixing his mistakes." Her words resonated deeply with everything that I had been feeling but couldn't quite articulate. Throughout the morning, as I tried to focus on work, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from my parents and extended family members. From my mother: "Please reconsider. Xavier's so scared. He's never been in a situation like this." From my father: "We raised you to be responsible and caring. Don't let us down when we need you most." From Aunt Deborah: "Your mother called. I can't believe you're hesitating to help your own brother. Family comes first, always." From Uncle Keith: "Heard about Xavier's situation. Your parents are devastated that you won't help. This isn't like you, Tessa." By lunchtime, it was clear that my parents had launched a full-scale campaign to pressure me into compliance, enlisting every family member they could think of to shame me into opening my wallet. The messages all carried the same basic theme. I was being selfish, ungrateful, and cruel by not immediately sacrificing my financial future for Xavier's mistake. What struck me most was how none of these family members offered to contribute financially themselves. They were all very generous with advice about what I should do with my money, but notably silent about opening their own checkbooks for Xavier's crisis. Around 2 p.m., my phone rang with a call from Xavier himself. "They let me make another call," he said, his voice even more desperate than it had been at 3 a.m. "Tess, I'm really scared. The other inmates, they can tell I don't belong here. I don't know if I can survive until trial." "Xavier, you've been there less than 24 hours. You don't understand what it's like in here.
The guards treat us like animals. My cellmate has been in and out of prison his whole life. He keeps talking about what happens to college boys like me. The emotional manipulation was transparent but effective. Despite my anger at Xavier's choices and my resentment over years of unequal treatment, I genuinely didn't want him to be hurt or worse. Have you talked to the lawyer about a payment plan? Maybe there are other options besides paying everything up front. Mom and Dad already asked. She wants the full retainer before she'll officially take the case. And the bail bondsman needs his fee today if we want to make bail at tomorrow's hearing. What about your musician friends? All those industry connections you've been cultivating for years. There was a long pause. I've called everyone I can think of. Most of them won't even take my calls now that word is getting around about the arrest. Apparently, being associated with drug charges isn't good for their image. The fair-weather nature of Xavier's music industry relationships was telling, but not surprising. He had spent years building a network based on potential, rather than genuine friendship or mutual support.
Xavier, I need you to understand something. $20,000 is more money than I have. To get it, I would have to take on debt that would take me years to repay. It would mean giving up any hope of buying a home, going back to school, or having any financial security. But I'm your brother. I would do the same for you. Would you? When have you ever sacrificed anything for me? When have you ever even noticed when I needed help? That's not fair. You've always been the responsible one. You've never needed help like this. I've needed help plenty of times. I just learned early on not to ask because the answer was always no. Remember when my car broke down during my junior year of college and I couldn't afford the repairs? I had to take 3 buses to get to class for 2 months while I saved up the money. Did you offer to help then? I was just a kid. You were 20 years old and you had just gotten a brand new car from Mom and Dad. This is different, Tessa. This is my life we're talking about. And it's my financial life we're talking about. Why is your crisis more important than my future? Because family helps family. Because that's what love means. There it was again, the weaponization of love and family loyalty to pressure me into a decision that served everyone's interests but my own. If family helping family is so important, why didn't Mom and Dad save money for emergencies instead of spending everything on your music career? Why didn't they think about what would happen if you ever needed real help? Don't blame them for supporting my dreams. I'm not blaming them for supporting your dreams. I'm questioning why supporting your dreams was worth going into debt, but supporting my dreams never warranted any financial sacrifice at all. The line went quiet. When Xavier spoke again, his voice had hardened. Fine. If you won't help me, I understand where I stand with you. When I get out of this, and I will get out, somehow, I'll remember who was there for me and who wasn't. Xavier! No, Tessa, you've made your choice. I hope your bank account keeps you warm at night because you're about to lose your family over money. The line went dead. I sat staring at my phone, feeling a mixture of guilt, anger, and something that might have been relief. For the first time in my adult life, I had refused to automatically sacrifice my own interests for Xavier's benefit. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. My phone immediately buzzed with a text message from my mother. Xavier just called us crying. How could you be so cruel to your own brother when he's already suffering? We're ashamed of the person you've become. That text message crystallized something for me. In my parents' minds, I was the villain in this story, not Xavier, who had made the catastrophically poor decisions that created this crisis, but me, for refusing to bankrupt myself to fix his mistakes. After 28 years of being the responsible child, the one who handled her own problems and asked for nothing, I was now being painted as selfish and cruel for finally setting a boundary. As I sat in my cubicle, surrounded by the normal sounds of office life, I realized that this moment had been building for years.
Every time I had been expected to be understanding when Xavier received something I was denied, every time I had been told to be responsible while he was indulged, every time I had been overlooked while he was celebrated, all of it had led to this moment where my family assumed I would sacrifice everything for him without question. For the first time in my adult life, I was seriously considering what would happen if I said no and meant it.
That evening, I sat in my apartment trying to focus on anything other than the constant buzzing of my phone. The family pressure campaign had intensified throughout the day, with relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly calling to express their disappointment in my selfishness. The messages had taken on an increasingly desperate and manipulative tone. For my cousin Sarah, "I always looked up to you growing up. I can't believe you'd abandon Xavier when he needs you most." For my grandmother's sister, "Your grandmother would be rolling in her grave if she knew how you're treating your brother." From a family friend, "Your parents are such good people. They don't deserve this heartbreak on top of everything else." Each message felt like a calculated attempt to erode my resolve, to make me feel so guilty and isolated that I would capitulate just to make the emotional assault stop. What struck me most was that none of these people seemed to consider that maybe Xavier should feel guilty for putting his family in this position, or that maybe my parents should feel some responsibility for creating the entitled attitude that led to his arrest. At 8 p.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole to see both my parents standing on my doorstep, looking grim and determined. This was unprecedented. They had never come to my apartment unannounced, had rarely visited at all in the 6 years I'd lived here. I opened the door reluctantly. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Vincent said, pushing past me into my small living room. "This situation has gone too far." Maureen followed, her eyes scanning my modest apartment with the same barely concealed judgment she had always shown toward my practical lifestyle choices. They both sat heavily on my secondhand sofa, looking uncomfortable in my space, but determined to have this conversation. "Tessa, we've been thinking about this all day. We understand that $20,000 is a lot of money for someone in your situation." Someone in my situation. The phrase was loaded with implications about my lower income, my single status, my less prestigious career compared to what they had envisioned for their children. "So we've come up with a compromise," Vincent continued. "We'll find a way to cover half the costs if you can cover the other half. $10,000. Surely you can manage that." $10,000 was still more than I had in savings. It would still require me to take on debt or raid my retirement account. The fact that they had framed this as a generous compromise revealed how completely they misunderstood my financial reality. "How exactly are you planning to come up with $10,000? I asked. "We'll figure it out," Maureen said vaguely. "Maybe a loan against the house, or we'll ask your Uncle Keith for help." So they were willing to go into debt themselves or ask other family members for money, but only if I also committed to financial sacrifice. The message was clear. Everyone needs to suffer for Xavier's mistakes except Xavier himself. What happens when we need money for his ongoing legal fees, when he needs treatment programs or court costs? "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Vincent said dismissively. "Right now, we need to focus on getting him out of jail." "And then what? He moves back into your basement, continues living off your support while he pursues his music career?" "He's learned his lesson," Maureen insisted. "This experience has been a wake-up call for him." "Has it? Because when I talked to him today, he was focused on how unfair his situation was and how everyone else needed to fix it for him. I didn't hear any accountability or plans for how he's going to prevent this from happening again." My parents exchanged one of their looks, the silent communication they had perfected over 30 years of marriage. Vincent leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Tessa, let me be very clear about something. Xavier is our son, and we will do whatever it takes to help him. We're asking you to be part of the solution as his sister. But with or without your help, we're going to save him." "Okay, then do that." "It's not that simple.
Without your contribution, we'll have to take much more drastic measures. We might lose the house. We might have to declare bankruptcy. Your father might not be able to retire when he planned. The implicit threat was obvious. If I didn't help, I would be responsible for my parents' financial ruin. Never mind that their financial vulnerability was the result of their own choices to overspend on Xavier's dreams. Never mind that I had never asked them to sacrifice their financial security for my benefit. So, you're saying that if I don't give you $10,000, you'll destroy your own financial future to save Xavier's kook?
We're saying that family loyalties sometimes require sacrifice, Maureen replied. We sacrificed for both of you children your entire lives. Now we need you to sacrifice for your brother. You sacrificed for Xavier. I was expected to be self-sufficient. That's not true, and you know it. Is it? When I needed help with college tuition, what was I told? When my car broke down, who paid for the repairs? When I needed professional clothes for job interviews, who took me shopping? The silence stretched uncomfortably. We all knew the answers to those questions. You were always more independent, Vincent finally said. Xavier needed more support. Xavier needed more support? Or Xavier demanded more attention and you gave it to him? This isn't about the past, Maureen snapped. This is about right now. Your brother is in jail and we need your help to get him out. And I'm telling you that I can't afford to help without seriously damaging my own financial future. Can't or won't? Vincent asked. Both. I can't afford it, and I won't enable Xavier's pattern of creating problems for other people to solve. Vincent stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. Fine. I can see we're wasting our time here. You've made it clear that your money is more important to you than your family. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. When your family needed you most, you chose your bank account over your brother. I chose my financial stability over bailing Xavier out of the consequences of his own criminal behavior, I corrected. Same thing, Maureen said, also standing. You're abandoning your family when we need you. I'm setting a boundary. There's a difference. The difference, Vincent said, moving toward the door, is that boundaries work both ways. If you're not willing to be part of this family when it matters most, then maybe you shouldn't be part of this family at all. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. After 28 years of feeling like an outsider in my own family, they were now threatening to make it official. Are you saying that if I don't pay Xavier's bail, you're disowning me? We're saying that family means being there for each other in times of crisis. If you can't do that, then you're choosing not to be family. So my membership in this family is conditional on my willingness to bankrupt myself for Xavier's mistakes? Your membership in this family is conditional on your willingness to act like family when it matters most, Vincent said coldly. They headed for the door, but Vincent turned back one final time. The bail hearing is tomorrow at 2 p.m. If you change your mind and decide that your brother's freedom is worth more than your savings account, call us. Otherwise, don't bother calling us at all. The door slammed behind them, leaving me alone in my apartment with the weight of an ultimatum that felt both shocking and inevitable. After 28 years of being the responsible daughter, the one who asked for nothing and handled everything on her own, I was being kicked out of my family for finally refusing to sacrifice my future for Xavier's present. As I sat in the silence of my apartment, I realized that this moment had been building my entire life. Every inequality, every time I had been expected to be understanding while Xavier was indulged, every instance of conditional love disguised as family values, it had all led to this ultimatum. Pay up or get out. For the first time in my adult life, I was seriously considering choosing to get out.
I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every moment of inequality, every time I had swallowed my hurt feelings to keep the peace. My parents' ultimatum echoed in my mind. Pay up or get out.
The bail hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. I had less than 18 hours to decide whether to destroy my financial future or lose my family forever. At 3 a.m., I got up and made a list on paper, something I did when facing major decisions. On one side, I wrote down what would happen if I paid Xavier's bail and legal fees. On the other side, I wrote down what would happen if I refused. If I pay $10,000 plus in immediate debt, years of loan payments, destroying my ability to buy a home or build savings, probable additional costs as Xavier's legal situation progressed, reinforcement of the family pattern where I sacrifice for Xavier's benefit, no guarantee Xavier would learn from this experience or change his behavior, continued expectation that I would be the family's financial safety net. If I refuse, complete estrangement from parents and extended family, loss of all family traditions, holidays, and connections, Xavier potentially spending months or years in prison, guilt and uncertainty about whether I made the right choice. But also, financial security and independence preserved, boundaries established that might force Xavier to take responsibility, freedom from toxic family dynamics that had harmed my self-worth for decades. As I stared at the lists, I realized that the choice wasn't really between helping my brother or not helping him. The choice was between continuing to enable a destructive family dynamic or finally breaking free from it. At 6 a.m., I called in sick to work again and decided to seek outside perspective. I made an emergency appointment with a therapist, something I had been considering for months but kept putting off due to the cost. Dr. Kim Chen had an opening at 10 a.m., and I booked it immediately. "Tell me about your family dynamic," Dr. Chen said after I had explained the immediate crisis. For the next hour, I found myself describing patterns I had never articulated out loud. The consistent favoritism toward Xavier, the way my achievements were minimized while his were celebrated, the expectation that I should be grateful for less while understanding that he deserved more. What you're describing sounds like a classic golden child and scapegoat dynamic. In these families, one child can do no wrong and receives unconditional support, while the other child is expected to be perfect, self-sufficient, and endlessly understanding of the golden child's needs. "But they love me," I protested. "They're not abusive parents." Emotional neglect and conditional love can be just as damaging as outright abuse, sometimes more so because it's harder to identify and address. Tell me, when you were growing up, how often did your parents express pride in your accomplishments without comparing them to Xavier or immediately shifting focus to him? I thought about it for a long moment. I can't remember a single time. And when you needed help, emotional, financial, or practical support, what was their typical response? That I was responsible and capable and I should handle it myself. That Xavier needed more help because he was more sensitive or creative or... I trailed off, seeing the pattern clearly for the first time. What you're facing now is a test of whether you're willing to continue participating in this dynamic. Your parents are essentially asking you to sacrifice your financial future to maintain their ability to rescue Xavier from consequences. If you comply, you reinforce the pattern. If you refuse, you're setting a boundary that could force everyone to change. But what if Xavier really does get hurt in prison? What if he gets assaulted or worse? How do I live with that? That's a legitimate concern, but consider this. Xavier is a 26-year-old adult who chose to buy drugs and assault a police officer. Those were his decisions. The consequences, including the risk of spending time in jail, are also his to face. Your family's financial inability to bail him out is the direct result of their choice to spend their resources on his music career rather than maintaining emergency savings. So you think I should refuse to help? I think you should make the decision that preserves your own well-being and breaks the cycle of enabling behavior. Based on what you've told me, paying Xavier's bail would likely reinforce his belief that someone will always rescue him from the consequences of his actions.
As I drove home from the therapy session, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: clarity. For the first time, I could see the situation objectively, rather than through the lens of guilt and family obligation that had clouded my judgment my entire life. At 1 p.m., 1 hour before Xavier's bail hearing, I called my parents. "Tessa," my mother's voice was hopeful, desperate. "Did you change your mind? I wanted to let you know my final decision before the hearing. And I won't be paying Xavier's bail or legal fees." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Mom, are you there? You're really going to let your brother sit in jail?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm going to let Xavier face the consequences of his own choices, just like I've had to face the consequences of mine my entire life." "Tessa, please, I'm begging you. This is your brother we're talking about. And I'm your daughter. Have you ever begged anyone to help me with anything?" Another long pause. "That was different. You were always stronger, more independent." "No, Mom, I was forced to be independent because no one was willing to help me. There's a difference." My father's voice came on the line, apparently having grabbed the phone from my mother. "Fine, Tessa, you've made your choice. Don't expect to be welcome at family gatherings anymore. Don't expect birthday cards or Christmas presents. As far as we're concerned, you're no longer our daughter." The words should have devastated me. Instead, I felt something unexpected: relief. "I understand," I said calmly. "I'm sorry it came to this, but I can't continue participating in a family dynamic where my worth is measured by my willingness to sacrifice everything for Xavier." "You're selfish and ungrateful," Vincent spat. "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us." "You gave Xavier everything. You gave me conditional love and the expectation that I should be grateful for less." I could hear my mother crying in the background. "Goodbye, Dad. I hope Xavier gets the help he needs, and I hope you eventually understand why I made this decision." I hung up before he could respond. At 2:47 p.m., I received a text from Aunt Deborah. Xavier's bail was denied. Judge said he was a flight risk. He'll be in jail until trial. Hope you're satisfied. I wasn't satisfied. I was sad for Xavier, worried about his safety, and grieving the loss of my family. But for the first time in my adult life, I had chosen my own well-being over their demands. And despite everything, that felt like the beginning of something important. The days following my decision were some of the most difficult of my adult life. The silence from my parents was deafening, but it was quickly replaced by a coordinated campaign of guilt and harassment from extended family members that was more intense than anything I had experienced. It started with my Aunt Deborah calling repeatedly, leaving increasingly hostile voicemails. "Tessa, this is your aunt. I cannot believe what you've done to this family. Your brother is sitting in a jail cell because you're too selfish to help. Your parents are devastated. They can't eat, can't sleep. Your mother has been crying for 3 days straight." The next message was even worse. "I've been thinking about this, and I realize now that you've always been jealous of Xavier. This is your revenge, isn't it? You finally found a way to hurt him and get back at your parents for loving him more." That accusation hit particularly hard because there was a grain of truth in it. I had been jealous of Xavier's treatment. Though my decision wasn't about revenge, it was about self-preservation and breaking a toxic cycle. Uncle Keith's approach was different, but equally manipulative. "Tessa, your Uncle Keith here. I've been talking to your dad, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. Nobody expects you to pay all the money yourself. The family can pull together. I can contribute $1,000. Maybe your cousin Sarah can help out. We just need you to coordinate things and handle the bulk of it since you have the best credit and job situation." Even in their attempts to be conciliatory, they were still asking me to be the primary financial responsible party and coordinator for Xavier's rescue. They wanted to contribute token amounts while expecting me to take on the real burden.
My cousin Sarah called next, taking a more personal approach. Tess, I know we haven't talked much since high school, but I've always considered you like a big sister. I can't reconcile the caring person I knew with someone who would abandon family like this. What happened to you? Did you get so caught up in your career and money that you forgot what really matters? The most painful call came from Mrs. Henderson, my parents' longtime neighbor who had known me since childhood. Tessa, dear, I just wanted you to know that I've been praying for your family during this difficult time. Your poor mother looks like she's aged 10 years in the past week. I see her sitting on the front porch, just staring into space. She told me that you refused to help Xavier and that she doesn't understand how she raised such a cold-hearted daughter. Cold-hearted daughter. The words echoed in my mind for days. What made the harassment particularly insidious was how it was structured to make me doubt my own perceptions and decisions. Nobody directly acknowledged the years of favoritism or the impossibility of what they were asking me of financially. Instead, they painted me as suddenly cruel, selfish, and inexplicably different from the person they had known. By the end of the first week, I had received over 40 phone calls and texts from various relatives, family friends, and even some of Xavier's musician acquaintances who had somehow gotten my number. The message was consistent. I was a terrible person who had betrayed her family in their darkest hour. The stress was taking a physical toll. I wasn't sleeping well, had lost my appetite, and found it difficult to concentrate at work. Amanda, my supervisor, noticed the change immediately. Tessa, you look terrible. How are you holding up with everything? Not great, I admitted. My family has basically declared war on me for not paying my brother's bail. I'm getting calls and texts all day from relatives telling me what a horrible person I am. Have you considered blocking their numbers? I've thought about it, but what if there's a real emergency? What if something happens to my parents or if Xavier gets hurt in jail? So you're keeping yourself available to be abused just in case they need you for something in the future. When she put it that way, the dysfunction was obvious. I was allowing myself to be emotionally tortured by people who had made it clear they no longer considered me family, just in case they might need something for me in the future. Maybe you should talk to someone professional about this, Amanda suggested. The company's health insurance covers mental health services. I made another appointment with Dr. Chen, this time for a regular weekly session rather than just crisis intervention. How are you handling the family pressure? She asked. Badly. I'm starting to wonder if I made the right decision. Maybe I am being selfish. Maybe family really should come first, even when it's expensive and painful.
Let me ask you something, Dr. Chen said. If one of your close friends was in your exact situation, if their brother had been arrested for drug charges and their parents demanded they pay $20,000 or be disowned, what advice would you give them? I thought about it seriously. I would tell them that their parents were being manipulative and that they shouldn't destroy their financial future for someone else's poor decisions. But you can't give yourself that same compassionate advice? It feels different when it's your own family. Why? Because family is supposed to be forever. Because you're supposed to love your family unconditionally. And have they loved you unconditionally? The question hung in the air. I thought about all the times my love had been tested, all the conditions that had been placed on my acceptance in the family, all the ways I had been made to feel less worthy than Xavier. No, I finally admitted. Their love has always been conditional on me being the responsible one, the one who doesn't ask for help, the one who understands why Xavier needs more. So why are you holding yourself to a standard they've never held themselves to? It was a breakthrough moment. I was expecting myself to love unconditionally while accepting conditional love in return.
I was demanding that I sacrifice everything for people who had never been willing to sacrifice anything for me. During that second week, the family harassment began to evolve. When emotional manipulation didn't work, some relatives tried different tactics. My cousin Michael, whom I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, called with a business proposition. Look, Tess, I know everyone's been giving you a hard time, but I get it. $20,000 is a lot of money. What if we structured it as a business loan? You front the money, and Xavier pays you back over time with interest once he gets back on his feet. The naivety of the suggestion was almost laughable. Xavier, who had never held a steady job or shown any financial responsibility, was going to pay back a $20,000 loan with interest while dealing with criminal charges and a destroyed reputation? Michael, Xavier has never paid back any money he's borrowed from anyone, including our parents. Why would this be different? Because he'll be grateful. Because this experience will change him. Because family debts are different. Family debts are different because they're never actually expected to be repaid, and bringing them up later makes you the bad guy for keeping track. By the end of the second week, something shifted in me. Instead of feeling guilty and defensive about their accusations, I started feeling angry. These people who had stood by silently for years while I was treated as less important than Xavier, who had never once questioned why I received less support or fewer opportunities, were now organizing a campaign to shame me into financial ruin. The turning point came when I received a group text that had accidentally been sent to me instead of being about me. It was from Aunt Deborah to several cousins. I think if we keep the pressure up, Tessa will crack. She's always been a people pleaser. Nobody can handle being the family pariah forever. Reading that text was like having cold water thrown on my face. They weren't concerned about Xavier's well-being or genuinely disappointed in my character. They were running a coordinated psychological campaign designed to break me down until I complied with their demands. That night, I blocked every family member's number except my parents. If there was a genuine emergency, they could reach me. Everyone else could deal with their opinions about my character without my participation. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night.
The silence that followed blocking my family members was initially unsettling, then gradually became peaceful. Without the constant barrage of guilt trips and accusations, I could finally think clearly about my life and what I wanted it to look like moving forward. 3 weeks after Xavier's arrest, I received an unexpected call at work. The caller ID showed my mother's number, which I hadn't blocked in case of genuine emergencies. Tessa? Maureen's voice was small, defeated in a way I had never heard before. Hi, Mom. Is everything okay? I wanted you to know that Xavier was attacked in jail yesterday. My blood ran cold. Despite everything, despite my anger at his choices and my family's treatment of me, Xavier was still my brother. Is he okay? He's in the medical ward. 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and his arm is fractured. The other inmates, they targeted him because he's educated and comes from a middle-class family. I felt a wave of guilt crash over me. Had I been wrong? Had my refusal to pay his bail led to this violence? Mom, I'm so sorry. Is he going to be okay? The doctors say he'll recover physically, but Tessa, her voice broke. He's different now. He's scared all the time. He barely speaks when we visit. This place is destroying him. The manipulation was subtle, but present. My mother was telling me about Xavier's suffering while carefully avoiding any direct request for help, letting the implication hang in the air that I could still change my mind and somehow fix this. What did his lawyer say about the case? She thinks she can get him a plea deal now. The assault charges against the other inmates who hurt him might help show that he's not suited for prison, but it's still going to cost money we don't have. How much? Another $10,000 for the plea negotiations and court costs. We've already taken out a loan against the house for his initial legal fees. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar tug of guilt and responsibility. But then I remembered Dr. Chen's words about conditional love and enabling behavior. Mom, I'm sorry Xavier got hurt. I really am. But me paying his legal fees wouldn't have prevented that attack. It would have just delayed it until trial if the plea deal fell through. But he might be out by now. If what? If I had paid bail money I didn't have and gone into debt for his mistakes? Mom, even if I had paid the bail, the judge denied it anyway, remember? Xavier would have been in jail regardless of my decision. There was a long pause. I suppose that's true. Xavier's situation is terrible, and I hate that he's suffering, but it's the consequence of his choice to buy drugs and assault a police officer. No amount of money from me would change the fact that he committed serious crimes. You sound so cold, Tessa, so different from the caring daughter I raised. I'm the same person I've always been. The difference is that I'm finally standing up for myself instead of automatically sacrificing my well-being for Xavier's benefit. After I hung up, I realized something important. I felt sad about Xavier's situation, but I didn't feel guilty about my decision anymore. The attack had been horrible, but it hadn't been caused by my refusal to pay bail that was denied anyway. My mother's attempt to rekindle my guilt had actually strengthened my resolve by showing me that even Xavier's physical suffering was being weaponized to manipulate me. That evening, I called Dr. Chen for an emergency phone session. I'm proud of you, she said after I described the conversation with my mother. You managed to maintain appropriate boundaries while still expressing genuine concern for your brother's well-being. That's incredibly difficult to do with family members who are skilled at emotional manipulation. I keep waiting for the guilt to come back, but it hasn't. That's because you're starting to differentiate between appropriate concern and inappropriate responsibility. You can be sad that your brother is suffering without believing it's your job to prevent or fix his suffering. My family would say that's exactly what makes me cold and selfish. Your family has trained you to believe that love means sacrificing your well-being for others' poor choices. That's not love. That's codependency. Healthy love includes boundaries, accountability, and mutual respect. As the weeks passed, I began to build a life that felt authentically mine for the first time. Without the constant stress of family drama and expectations, I had energy to invest in relationships and activities that actually fulfilled me.
I joined a hiking group and met Brooke, a nurse practitioner who had also dealt with toxic family dynamics. We bonded over our shared experiences of being the responsible siblings who were expected to clean up everyone else's messes. The hardest part, Brooke told me during one of our weekend hikes, was realizing that being the family problem solver wasn't actually helping anyone. It was just enabling them to avoid growing up. "How long did it take for you to stop feeling guilty?" she asked. "About 2 years, but the relief I felt from not being everyone's emotional caretaker made it worth it. My brother had to learn to handle his own problems, and guess what? He actually figured it out when he didn't have me to fall back on." I also started dating for the first time in over a year. Ethan was a graphic designer I met at a professional networking event. He was kind, stable, and refreshingly drama-free. When I told him about my family situation, his response was supportive rather than judgmental. "That sounds incredibly difficult," he said, "but it also sounds like you made a brave decision to protect yourself." Most people think I should have helped my brother regardless of the cost. Most people haven't been in your situation. It's easy to be generous with other people's money and sacrifice. Having someone validate my decision without trying to fix or change it was healing in ways I hadn't expected. At work, without the constant distraction of family crises, my performance improved dramatically. I completed projects ahead of schedule, volunteered for additional responsibilities, and even suggested a new client outreach program that Amanda approved for implementation. "You seem like a different person these days," Amanda commented during my quarterly review. more confident, more focused. Whatever changes you've made in your personal life are clearly working. I set some boundaries with family members who were creating stress in my life. Good for you. Family can be the most toxic relationships we have because we're taught we have to tolerate behavior from relatives that we would never accept from friends or colleagues. 6 weeks after Xavier's arrest, I received a letter in the mail from him, the first direct communication we had had since our phone argument. The return address showed the county jail, and my hands shook slightly as I opened it. "Dear Tessa," it began in his familiar handwriting. "I know you're probably surprised to hear from me. I've had a lot of time to think in here, and I wanted to say some things I should have said a long time ago." The letter continued for 3 pages. Xavier wrote about the attack, about his fear and loneliness, but also about something I hadn't expected: accountability. I realize now that I've never had to face real consequences for my choices because someone always bailed me out. Mom and Dad mostly, but sometimes you too, even when you didn't want to. I never learned to think through my decisions because I knew someone would fix whatever went wrong. He went on, "I don't blame you for not paying my bail. I was angry at first, but now I understand that you were right. This is my mess, and it's my responsibility to deal with it. I'm actually proud of you for standing up to everyone. I know how hard that must have been." The letter concluded, "I'm going to take a plea deal and probably serve 18 months. When I get out, I want to have a different relationship with you, one where I'm not always the one in crisis expecting you to fix things. I hope you'll give me that chance someday." As I finished reading, I felt something I hadn't experienced in our relationship before: hope. Not hope that everything would magically be fixed, but hope that Xavier might finally be ready to grow up and take responsibility for his life. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I thought there might be a possibility of having a healthy relationship with my brother someday, when he had learned to stand on his own feet.
Xavier's letter marked a turning point, not just in our relationship, but in how I viewed my entire family situation. His acknowledgement of responsibility was something I had never heard from any family member before, and it gave me hope that real change might be possible. I decided to write back, keeping my response measured but supportive. "Xavier, I was surprised to receive your letter, but I'm glad you took the time to write. I appreciate your acknowledgement of the patterns we've fallen into as a family. I hope your time in jail, difficult as it is, helps you build the strength and self-reliance you'll need when you get out. I'm willing to talk more when you're ready, but only if we can build a relationship based on mutual respect rather than crisis management." 3 months after Xavier's arrest, I received another unexpected call, this time from my father. I hadn't spoken to either parent since my mother's call about Xavier's attack. "Tessa, it's your father. Hi, Dad. Is everything okay? That's what I'm calling to ask you. Your mother and I have been talking, and we realize we may have been too harsh in our reaction to your decision." I was stunned. Vincent admitting he might have been wrong about anything was unprecedented in our family history. What's changed? A lot of things. Xavier's lawyer convinced him to take the plea deal. He'll serve 18 months, but with good behavior, he could be out in 14. And he's been writing to us. He's taking responsibility for his actions in a way we've never seen before. That's good to hear. He told us about the letter he sent you, about how he doesn't blame you for not paying his bail. Tessa, I have to ask, were we wrong to expect you to help? The question I had wanted to hear my entire life, but it felt strange to hear it now, after I had already moved on. Dad, I couldn't afford to help without destroying my financial future. But more than that, constantly rescuing Xavier from consequences wasn't helping him learn to make better decisions. "Your mother and I have been in counseling," he said, surprising me again. "The therapist has been helping us understand some patterns in our family that we never recognized before." "What kind of patterns?" "How we treated you differently than Xavier. How we expected you to be independent while enabling his dependence. How we made you feel like you had to earn love
while giving it freely to him. Hearing my father articulate the very dynamics that had shaped my childhood was surreal. These were insights I had only recently come to understand myself through therapy. I'm glad you're getting professional help, Dad. Tessa, would you be willing to meet with us? Maybe have dinner sometime? Your mother misses you terribly, and I'd like the chance to apologize properly. I was quiet for a long moment, processing this unprecedented request. My parents were asking to meet with me, to apologize, to potentially rebuild our relationship. I'm willing to meet, but I need some conditions. Name them. No discussion of money or financial help for Xavier, no guilt trips about family loyalty, and I get to leave if the conversation becomes manipulative or hurtful. Agreed. Completely agreed. We arranged to meet the following Saturday at a restaurant downtown, neutral territory, as I had learned from my therapy sessions. When I arrived, both my parents looked older, more subdued than I remembered. My mother stood to hug me, and I could feel her trembling. Tessa, sweetheart, thank you for coming. You look wonderful. We ordered food and made small talk for the first few minutes, but eventually my father cleared his throat. Tessa, my mother and I owe you a significant apology. Through counseling and a lot of difficult conversations, we've come to understand how unfairly we treated you throughout your childhood and into your adult life. Maureen nodded, tears already forming in her eyes. We favored Xavier in ways that were wrong and harmful to both of you. We made you feel less valuable, less deserving of support and celebration. That was never our intention. But intention doesn't excuse the impact. What made you realize this? Honestly, Xavier's letters from jail, Vincent replied. He wrote to us about how he never learned to handle problems because we always fixed them for him. He said he realized that you had been forced to be independent because we never offered you the same safety net we provided him. He also said that he understood why you couldn't pay his bail and that he was proud of you for setting boundaries with us. Hearing your brother, the one we always thought needed protection, say he was proud of your strength made us realize how wrong we had been about everything. I felt a complex mix of emotions: validation, sadness for the years of inequality, and a cautious hope that real change might be possible. I appreciate the apology, I said carefully, but I need you to understand that I can't go back to being the person who sacrifices everything for family harmony. I've learned to value myself and my well-being. We don't want you to go back, Vincent said. We want to build something new, a relationship based on respect for the strong, independent woman you've become despite our failures as parents. Over the following months, we began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. My parents kept their word about not pressuring me regarding Xavier or expecting me to be the family problem solver. Instead, they asked about my life, my work, my hiking group, and my new relationship with Ethan. The changes weren't just in how they treated me, they were also learning to let Xavier handle his own situation. When he called from jail asking them to contact his old music contacts about potential opportunities when he got out, they told him he needed to handle those conversations himself. When he requested they send money for commissary items, they sent a modest amount rather than everything he asked for. It's hard, my mother admitted during one of our monthly dinners. Every instinct tells me to fix things for him, to make his life easier. But I can see now that our help was actually preventing him from growing up. My father nodded. The therapist calls it tough love, but it feels more like learning to love appropriately, supporting him without enabling him. Meanwhile, my own life continued to flourish. Ethan and I had been dating for 6 months, and our relationship had a stability and mutual respect I had never experienced before. He encouraged my boundaries with my family while supporting my efforts to rebuild healthier connections. My career was thriving as well. Without the constant distraction of family crises, I had been promoted to senior marketing coordinator and was being considered for a management position. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building toward a future I actually wanted, rather than just surviving day to day. The most significant change, however, was internal. The constant anxiety and people-pleasing behavior that had characterized my personality for years had largely disappeared. I was learning to trust my own judgment, to say no without guilt, and to prioritize my own needs alongside others rather than always putting myself last. Dr. Chen noted the transformation during one of our sessions. When you first came to see me, you were consumed with guilt about not being a good enough daughter and sister. Now you're focused on building a life that reflects your values and makes you happy. That's a profound shift. I feel like I'm finally becoming the person I was supposed to be before years of family dysfunction shaped my self-perception. That's exactly what healing looks like. Not becoming someone new, but removing the obstacles to becoming who you authentically are. As Xavier's release date approached, I felt nervous but hopeful about the possibility of building a genuine relationship with him. His letters had continued to show growth and accountability, and my parents' transformations suggested that our family dynamics might finally be changing for the better. But I also knew that real change would be tested when the crisis was over and everyone had to maintain new patterns without the pressure of extreme circumstances forcing better behavior.
2 years have passed since that early morning phone call that changed everything. As I sit in my new apartment, a beautiful 2-bedroom place in a safe neighborhood that I was able to afford thanks to my promotion to marketing director, I can hardly recognize the person I was before this ordeal began. Xavier was released from prison 14 months ago after serving his full sentence with good behavior. The man who came home was fundamentally different from the entitled, irresponsible person who had called me from jail. Prison had been brutal for him, but it had also been transformative in ways that years of family enabling never could have achieved. His first call after release wasn't to ask for money or a place to stay. It was to thank me for not bailing him out. "Tessa, I know this sounds crazy, but going to prison was the best thing that ever happened to me," he said during that first conversation. "For the first time in my life, I had to figure out how to survive on my own, how to solve my own problems, how to earn respect instead of having it handed to me." Xavier found his own apartment, a modest studio in Southeast Portland, and got a job at a music equipment repair shop. He wasn't performing anymore, but he was using his musical knowledge in a practical way that provided steady income and benefits. Most importantly, he was paying his own bills and handling his own problems. "I spent so many years waiting for my big break, convinced that I was destined for stardom," he told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings, a tradition we had established to rebuild our relationship slowly. "I never learned how to value regular work or find satisfaction in small accomplishments. Prison taught me that being able to support yourself is actually a huge accomplishment." The change in our relationship has been remarkable. Instead of me always being the responsible one cleaning up his messes, we now have conversations as equals. He asks about my life and actually listens to the answers. He remembers details about my work and relationship with Ethan. Most importantly, when he faces challenges, he talks through possible solutions instead of expecting me to fix things for him. My parents have maintained the changes they made during Xavier's incarceration. They still attend couples therapy and have learned to recognize when they're falling back into old patterns of favoritism or enabling behavior. My relationship with them has evolved into something I never thought possible: genuine, mutual respect. The hardest part, my mother admitted during a recent family dinner, was accepting that our love for Xavier was actually harming him. We thought we were being good parents by protecting him from consequences, but we were preventing him from developing the skills he needed to be a successful adult. My father nodded in agreement. And we were so focused on Xavier's needs that we never saw how capable and strong you had become on your own. We took your independence for granted instead of celebrating it. These acknowledgments, while gratifying, came too late to undo the damage to my childhood and young adult years, but they have made it possible to build something new and healthier for the future.
The most significant change in my life has been learning to trust my own judgment and prioritize my own well-being. The guilt and people-pleasing behavior that once defined my personality have been replaced with confidence and healthy boundaries. I've learned that saying no to unreasonable demands isn't selfish. It's necessary for maintaining relationships based on respect, rather than exploitation. My relationship with Ethan has deepened into something stable and nurturing. He proposed 6 months ago, and we're planning a small wedding next fall. What I treasure most about our relationship is how it's based on mutual support rather than one person constantly sacrificing for the other's benefit. "You know what I love about you?" Ethan said recently. "You're incredibly caring and supportive, but you never lose yourself in other people's problems. You figured out how to be loving without being codependent." That balance, caring without enabling, supporting without sacrificing my own well-being, has become the foundation of all my relationships now.
Professionally, my career has flourished beyond anything I had imagined possible. Without the constant distraction and stress of family crises, I've been able to focus fully on my work and pursue opportunities for growth. I'm now overseeing a team of 8 people and have been asked to lead a major rebranding project for our organization. More importantly, I've found ways to use my experiences to help others. I volunteer as a mentor for young women from dysfunctional families, helping them recognize unhealthy patterns and develop the confidence to set boundaries. Sharing my story has been healing for me and helpful for others who are struggling with similar family dynamics. The hardest thing to learn, I often tell the women I mentor, is that you can love your family without accepting toxic behavior from them. Boundaries aren't walls. They're guidelines for healthy relationships. One of my mentees, a 24-year-old named Jessica, whose parents expect her to support her drug-addicted brother financially, recently thanked me for helping her find the courage to say no to their demands. "I kept thinking that if I just helped him one more time, he would get clean and everything would be okay," she told me. "But you helped me see that my help was actually enabling his addiction. When I stopped giving him money, he finally went to rehab." These conversations remind me why standing up to my family was so important, not just for my own well-being, but as an example that change is possible when we stop participating in toxic dynamics. The lessons I've learned extend far beyond family relationships. I've discovered that people will treat you according to the boundaries you set and maintain. If you accept poor treatment, people will continue to treat you poorly. If you demand respect, most people will rise to meet that expectation. I've also learned that guilt is often a sign that you're doing something right, especially when you're changing long-standing patterns in relationships. The discomfort other people feel when you stop enabling their behavior will often be projected onto you as criticism and manipulation. Learning to sit with that guilt without changing course has been one of my most valuable skills. Perhaps most importantly, I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices. Xavier's time in prison was horrible, but it was also necessary for his growth into a responsible adult. My parents' financial struggles after overspending on his music career forced them to confront their enabling behavior and seek professional help. As I reflect on these past 2 years, I realize that the crisis Xavier created actually gave our entire family an opportunity to heal and grow. His arrest forced all of us to confront patterns that had been destructive for decades. My refusal to pay his bail created the space for everyone to learn new ways of relating to each other. The phone call that woke me up at 2:47 a.m. that February night felt like the worst thing that could happen to our family. In many ways, it turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to all of us. Today, I have a family that respects my boundaries, a career that fulfills me, a relationship built on mutual respect, and most importantly, a sense of self-worth that isn't dependent on other people's approval. I learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the most loving choice you can make for everyone involved.
Xavier is thriving in his new life of responsibility and independence. My parents have learned to love more appropriately and healthily, and I've discovered that I'm much stronger and more capable than I ever believed possible. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most important growth, and sometimes saying no is the most loving thing you can do for someone.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.